Community and Economic Development Committee. Mandy, please call the roll.
Mr. Littleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy? Here. Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Salatai?
Here.
Chair Shimon, one.
All right, thanks. Any changes to the agenda? Look good? Okay, let's go around the table and see who's here. Chris?
Sure. Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development.
Gary Brecky, representing Vertical Bridge on the variance.
Brian Yell, Planning Department.
Let's go ahead. We got interpreters.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Francis McLaughlin, Planning Department.
Abby, I'm the assistant director. Jen Aldean.
Richard Kinnapole, I'm Regional Operations Manager for Vertical Bridge.
Okay.
Jack Frost, Chief Code Enforcement.
All right, thanks. Is Michelle coming? She was here briefly.
She'll be around.
You're welcome to sit up here since we'll be talking about the hearing.
I'm actually just listening, and I'll let Gary do all the talking for us.
Okay. And when we do this, it's recorded for posterity. So we'll go around and have a presentation, I think, then primarily questions from assembly members, and I'll call out when it's time to speak. And particularly voices that the tape recorder doesn't know well, is give your name briefly, say Gary speaking, and whatever. And then if you do want to chime in, it'd be better to sit here, just the microphone will pick you up better.
And Michelle.
Oh,
You can move her side. We have plenty of chairs. Okay, so vertical land bridge. Is this, Chris, are you leading discussions?
Actually, I think Brian is.
Brian?
I'm just taking up space today.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this is quite a unique and frankly unusual case. This is one code reference where a tower height exceeds what is allowed in the district, and the Assembly is the only one that can approve the height exceeding that threshold. So we thought it would be beneficial to present it to this committee prior to going to the full Assembly if there are any questions, and also get some full background. But I will run through some background here just to get it on the record, and also make sure that I'm stating everything that needs to be said on this. So the petitioner would like to extend the useful life of an existing 283-foot tall telecommunications tower, which has been in existence since 1968, by constructing a tower wrap over the existing structure. The wrap will essentially be a new tower constructed around the existing tower. The existing tower is showing extensive signs of wear after 51 years of operation. Additionally, the tower was badly damaged during the November 30th, 2018 earthquake and has become a safety concern. The proposed improvements will greatly improve the structural integrity of the tower and will reduce the potential for catastrophic failure. Allowing this tower to remain at its current height and location will reduce disruption to telecommunications services. And there's a variety of services that are provided by this tower. I do have this additional supplement that was provided by the applicant that shows the coverage that this tower provides, as well as the different services that it provides. And it'll also help reduce the cost of delivering those services to surrounding residents. The variance request is necessary given the height of the tower, which is approximately 283 feet, and the distance from the base of the tower to nearby residences, which is only 178 feet. Given that the height of the tower exceeds that of its separation to nearby residences, there is a potential for health and safety impacts to residents in the event of a catastrophic structural failure of the tower and the resulting collapse. Minimum separation distances between telecommunications towers and residential properties are required to be a minimum of 200% of the tower's actual height. This will require a tower of this size to be separated a minimum of 566 feet from nearby residences. And because of that, this variance shall be approved by the Assembly. The tower was erected in 1968 when this area of Anchorage was largely undeveloped. The residential neighborhood south of the petition site was developed in 2001, 33 years after the tower was placed there. Because of this, the existing tower has been deemed to be legally non-conforming via July 22nd, 2009 non-conforming determination, and because that has the legal right to remain. Staff finds that all variance standards are met, and we recommend approval of the variance. This case also requires a conditional use to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. That is going before Planning and Zoning Commission on Monday. prior to the full assembly hearing. So depending upon the outcome of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, just to put the assembly on notice that we may require a postponement of this case.
Okay. Any questions? Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when we rewrote the cell tower ordinance here about 5 years ago, and we had meetings with community members when we were doing that over about a 3-month period or so. And the 200% separation distance was one of the must-haves. They were not going to agree to anything else that we were making changes in that ordinance unless we would maintain that 200% separation distance. They're just, people were just worried that those towers, you know, what goes up must come down type of thing. And so they wanted to have plenty of room for those towers to fall and not land on their residences. And so I just wanted to make sure we were aware that that was a big deal to the people who live near those cell towers.
Meg?
Yeah, I have 3 questions. Does the wrap on the tower or the new structure around the old tower make it substantially closer to the homes or substantially change the look of what's already there?
This is Gary speaking. It doesn't change the proximity of the tower to the residences because it's essentially centered around the existing tower. So the distance remains the same, about 170 feet. It is a larger tower to fit around the smaller tower, so there will be some visual change, although the tower structural architecture is the same. It's the same type of tower, so it's got visibility through all the structural members. So.
And then my 3rd question is are these towers built to any kind of seismic standards?
Oh, absolutely. Everything gets engineered, and those documents will be submitted for the building permit and be reviewed. So everything is designed and engineered for the conditions here.
I guess I have one last question. When would if this is approved, when would proposed construction?
This summer.
This summer. Okay.
Chris, any questions?
No, I don't have a problem with this project.
Okay. Forrest?
No.
So, what triggers this? Is it, I mean, you can modify some things without triggering a need for a variance. Okay, is it just the cost of doing this wrap triggers the?
So, Mr. Chair, it's essentially you're constructing a new tower over the existing tower. So because you have a new tower going up, that's why a lot of these requirements are changed.
You could, but essentially, I mean, you could maintain the tower, right? If one of the little pieces broke, you could replace it, and then it doesn't. So it's.
This is Gary again. One of the impetuses for pursuing this is that the existing clients on the existing tower would like to modify their antennas and add equipment. But the current existing tower loading is maxed out and no further equipment can be added to it structurally. So Vertical Bridge has also had interest from additional wireless carriers to co-locate in this location, but they can't provide that until or unless this wrap occurs. The wrap will structurally enhance the site so that additional carriers, additional equipment of existing carriers, and future growth can be accommodated. So that's a big impetus for doing this. There's a safety factor. The existing tower is 51 years old. They don't know the condition inside the tower members. They know that deterioration has taken place. And so there is some safety concern as well here. So
I call the neighborhood for questions.
Excuse me, how many years old did you say it was?
51.
51? Okay, thank you.
So what's the projected life of the new tower?
You know, I don't know how I can answer that. I haven't seen any prediction, but I would assume that it would be at least 50 years.
Okay.
And, you know, these towers undergo maintenance as they find things that need to be repaired or replaced. And right now, there is really not much more they can do with the existing towers. I don't even think the tower manufacturer is in business anymore. So getting replacement parts would have to be custom made if they wanted to try to beef something up. But it's more cost efficient to pursue a project like this with a longer useful lifespan than trying to keep maintaining a deteriorating tower.
Crystal?
Thank you.
Or,
So,
sorry, let me,
oh, go ahead.
I just, for the tape recorder, Dean Gates came in about 5 minutes or so.
Thank you.
So this existing tower is already out of compliance, and it technically, if it completely toppled over, could potentially hit a building, a house. Is that correct? It's close enough to
Well-
actually hit a nearby structure. If the entire thing from the ground
Fell over straight
fell
up.
over straight, yes.
Yes, that's true.
So my question is, has there been any evidence, or is there any kind of engineering done that shows how, if this were to fail, typically or potentially, where would be that most prevalent place where it would fail, to the point where it could, I mean, is it potentially going to cave in at the very bottom and the whole thing falls over, or typically would it fall apart in pieces? Anyway, do you have any evidence of that ever happening in any of these other towers anyplace else?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't think that engineering-wise they can predict exactly where a failure could occur. But, you know, it's quite typical with these type of guide towers that they don't fall straight over. That, I'm not going to say it's never happened, but it's not a typical failure. They usually crumple. A section will crumple, and then it'll crumple basically onto itself in a smaller radius than it would if it fell straight over. So, I mean, there is that possibility that it could fall straight over, but I think it's highly unlikely in a well-engineered structure.
Okay, good, thank you. And that was kind of where I was thinking anyway. And if I could, so what is the rationale behind having 200% of the tower height distance from any structure? Where did that actually come from?
Through the chair, Chris Schutte. That actually, Pete did a great job of summarizing that. He and I were both around during the latest iteration of the telecommunications tower code provisions in 2015, 2016. And that was the product of that working group at that time, made up of planning staff, obviously, assembly members, members of the industry, et cetera, in this actual committee. I don't recall there being a scientific reason. I think that there was research from other cities that had similar telecommunications tower fall provisions, but that was one that came from the community that the committee had just agreed to.
Okay, so there really wasn't any kind of research or any engineering study that said that this could potentially happen, so you need this much extra space or anything like that?
Through the chair, no,
Catastrophic.
you're correct. As I said, there were other jurisdictions that do have similar fall zone provisions, but it was not based on any sort of engineering or scientific study.
More important, it was emotional.
It was very emotional, yes.
200%.
Don't want to bounce onto their house.
I mean, I can understand.
Like
100%.
jump up and go 100% then fall.
But this is still under.
The lattice towers are no longer allowed. Is that correct?
Sure, there's not correct. You can still have a guy wire tower.
Beg your pardon?
You can still have a guy wire tower.
Oh, you can. And that means, okay, when I say lattice, am I using the wrong term?
Through the chair, they're both still allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it wasn't. Okay, so, but most don't have guy wires, right? Yours does.
Yeah, this is Gary. Typically in the industry, when we speak of a lattice tower, we speak of a freestanding tower of an open structural architecture that you can see through. a guide tower, which is what these are. I guess they're a lattice tower, but they're guide. And so in the industry, you just refer to them as a guide tower.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to, so I guess the next question is, if you talk to the neighbors, I don't see in the packet any, I mean, did a conditional use so everybody got a mailing?
I forget exactly how many mailers we sent out, but we didn't get a single comment back. We sent out 1,281 public hearing notices, and we did not receive a single response.
Yeah, this is Gary, and I sent out 1,700 mailers and never got a response.
Wow.
Why'd you send out 1,700?
Well, I'm not sure, but
I think Gary went above and beyond.
that was the list I got, and I was incredulous at that myself. So.
Neighborhood there. Yeah, that's interesting, because when we did the cell tower, there was a lot of, comparatively, quite a few people really concerned about, it's visual is one thing, but also it's going to follow my house.
If this tower was in Rogers Park.
Through the chair, real quick, I think one key difference, though, is that this is a 54-year-old tower? 51-year-old tower that predates the road, the neighborhood around it, et cetera. So it's been much like, I think you have one in Spenard as well.
Yeah.
That's been there longer than most people in this room have been alive, so it's probably more acceptable as a part of the landscape than cell towers that were going up, say, 10 to 5 years ago, many of which were in neighborhoods like Rogers Park, et cetera, that really inspired those communities to participate in the code writing process in 2015 and 2016. So I think they're a little bit different beasts.
Well, thank you. Wasn't this originally a radio tower? A radio transmission
This is
tower?
Gary. Yes, there were 2 broadcast towers for radio, and I think then TV. There is a tower to the north of this one on the same property that's much taller, and the smaller tower to the south was actually used as a reflector to set the direction or a more oblong pattern for the radiation coming off the north tower. The north tower is what they call a hot tower, meaning that the tower itself is a radiating element. That's why wireless communications have not been placed on it. It's still a broadcast tower. So the south tower is not a hot tower, and that's why the communications has developed on that one the way it has.
Thank you.
So the taller ones for TV and radio?
I believe so.
That's on your tower.
Pardon me?
You're not working on that tower?
No, we're not doing anything with the north tower.
Okay, so the conditional use, this is a variance from the height. That's all we're talking about. What are the conditional uses?
So through the chair, unfortunately I can't speak to specifics about the conditional use because it's another staff member that's working on that case. However, it did originally go before Planning and Zoning last month. Planning and Zoning postponed their decision. They had requested some additional information from Vertical Bridge. It's my understanding they've provided that information to Planning and Zoning, and now we're just going to see what the meeting result is on Monday.
Okay. It doesn't deal with height or anything in the conditional use?
The conditional use is in regards to just the placement of the tower itself. Is this tower an appropriate use of the land in this area?
And it won't deal with the height, the distance from the residence?
It will not. This is the only entitlement that will deal with the height.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, or through the chair, I believe the planning and zoning case is about the underlying zoning and the towers not being allowed in it.
What's the zoning?
R2M is what Gary just said.
Yeah, just another question. I was just curious as to the kind of heavy equipment that is required and what kind of impacts you think it'll have to the neighborhood when you do start building the
Yeah,
towers.
this is Gary. Typical equipment like backhoe, maybe small bulldozer with a grade afterwards, or there'll be some winches that are generally attached to vehicles, trucks. It accesses off of Dowling Road, and it's through a gated fence, a secured fence. I don't anticipate any impact on any of the residential areas by any of the activity there. The parcel's 8.5 acres. It's quite large, and I would doubt that the residents in the surrounding neighborhoods would even know of any activity except as they see the progress of the RAP going up.
So you're not talking big cranes or?
There may be a need for a crane as they get higher, but I'm not sure how they did KTVA. Did they use a crane?
This is Richard. They did not use a crane. They actually used the typical rope winch setup connected to the tower itself.
So they use kind of a gin pole method, which is a method of raising sections and bolting them in place, piecing it together as they go, and then they cut the antennas that are on the existing tower over to the new tower as they build up. So it's a pretty smooth, relatively smooth transition for the wireless carriers that are on it. I don't see much service disruption as they go along.
Anything else? Any recommendation?
Recommend approval.
Second on that somewhere? Chris?
Second.
Any opposition? Okay, so what we'll do is, this is just a committee, so we're not everyone. So when this comes up Tuesday, there'll probably be some questions, discussions, but we'll just say we discussed it here and recommended approval. And then it'll go to a vote of everybody. Well, good. So I hope to see you Tuesday.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, is this a public hearing? It is.
Sorry?
Is this a public hearing item? I forget.
Yes, 14Q.
Oh, wow.
It's a very long night on Tuesday.
No, be quick.
I think it'll go quick.
We get this new chair. Keep it rolling.
I just,
Okay, B, front porch lot coverage.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an AO that Michelle had approached me about writing, and I was really excited to write it because one of my most memorable lectures in college was from a professor that talked about the death of the American neighborhood because of the design changes and no longer incorporating front porches. This AO aims to give an incentive to home builders to construct a front porch. It's going to exempt up to 200 square feet for a front porch that meets very specific parameters. And those parameters would be the area of the first floor covered front porch running parallel to and projecting a minimum of 4 feet from the street-facing facade that is unenclosed or partly enclosed as by a handrail on 3 sides and having a minimum width dimension of 8 feet. And as of now, we have the provision only applying to detached single-family dwellings. And we did provide a useful graphic. It's on page 5 of your packet. So that will demonstrate what design of front porches this would apply to and which ones it wouldn't apply to.
so what page is that?
Page 5. And there's multiple benefits to having a front porch in the neighborhood. It gets residents outside, it gets them waving and saying hi to their neighbors. It places eyes on the street. It can reduce petty crime. It encourages neighborhood relationships, and it also discourages the typical design that's been so prevalent in Anchorage over the last few decades of the snout house and the tuck under.
The what?
So you have that. It's called a snout house.
Oh, snout house.
Where the garage is the forwardmost projection of a home, and then the tuck under is the one where you have the garage and living space above. And you see those all over the place. But it does nothing to encourage residents from getting out and talking to each other. We did approach the Home Builders Association with this AO, and we do have a letter of support from them, and that's on page 6 of your packet. We also presented this to Federation of Community Councils, and it was very well received. A lot of them were very excited about it. And additionally, the housing designs that we see nowadays too, they place emphasis on interior living space. So you have your max lot coverage, which in an R1 neighborhood is 30%. So to build your house footprint to that 30% mark, but you're maximizing your interior living space. You're not placing any emphasis on outdoor living space. And front porches, because they are covered, they're included in that lot coverage calculation. So oftentimes they get left out of a design. Or it may just be like a few steps or something that goes to the front door. It's not really a porch. But that is the intent of this AO, and we're excited about it moving forward. And Michelle, did anything else to add?
No, you did great.
Good, thanks. And for the tape recorder, Michelle McNulty has joined us on that.
Thank you. I'm really excited to see this. In my personal life, we put out 10 benches around town called the Front Porch Project. So I love front porches. I love active streets. I'm actually wondering, I want to know a little bit more about why only single-family structures. I understand the commercial aspect and that restriction right now are not applying it there, but why only single-family? And maybe talk me through a little bit about what we mean by single family, like zero lot line, is it possible there, and those kinds of things, because we do have a lot of neighborhoods that are nothing but those, and so we're really not doing anything to encourage then that kind of street activation.
So, it's right there.
Sure. So you touched on a few things there. So zero lot line, this would only apply to detached single-family dwellings. It wouldn't apply to attached single-family dwellings. That's zero lot line. And the reason that we decided to go with detached single-family dwellings is just take a very conservative approach right off the bat. We did discuss it both with FCC and with Planning and Zoning Commission on opening it up to two-family and multifamily dwellings. The feedback that we got as far as from multifamily dwellings is that they have a whole host of design options that they can choose from and menu options, and they typically don't have any problems meeting or staying under their maximum lot coverage for multifamily dwellings. And
multifamily also already require public and private open space, so they're already encouraged as part of the design requirements to create that space for neighbors to interact.
I have a couple of follow-ups on that. One, I think that the detached single family is a little bit contrary to our encouragement of density in Anchorage, and density in a way that encourages interaction. So I'll just say that, particularly with zero lot lines, because people treat those a lot like they feel very much like it's a detached single family home. And then on the multifamily dwellings, the open space requirements, are there any requirements that those have to be street facing though that would fit within the intent of this, or could it be interior courtyards or other things? Because you're not just neighbors with who you live with in that building, you're neighbors with your street. So, and I can get that information offline, but I'm curious. Oh, okay.
There isn't a requirement that it be street facing, so it's a great point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think my comments are very much in line with Ms. Zolotel's. I think that so the real meat of this, right, is the insertion of F. That's the whole thing. That's the whole code change, right? It's a little bit too prescriptive for my taste, and I understand why you did some of that. But to get to Ms. Zolotel's point, I would just assume strike out the whole last sentence, and if anyone can figure out a way to do this in a good way for a duplex or for other multifamily. It's true they have other requirements too, but why couldn't we just if some creative architect can figure out a way to make this work in something other than single family, let them. And so we don't have to say, well, we think this fits in this, and then we think this fits in this. Like, this is a tool anyone can use. And if you can figure out a creative, because we think it's a net positive, if we think it's a creative way, let them figure it out, Some of the others too, why, I guess I don't know, I'm trying to think. How big is 200 square feet? That's a pretty big porch.
20 by 10.
20, well, no, it's 20 by 10. But I'm trying to visualize it in my head.
Across the room.
It's bigger than this.
Yeah.
The table.
Yeah, it would be bigger than the table.
Plenty of room for table and chairs and.
And I really appreciate the graphic. The graphic sort of explains to me why the minimum, the 4 feet street-facing facade. That the graphic does a good job explaining that. But some of the other stuff. I mean, why a minimum width dimension of 8 feet, for example, or what if somebody found a design that was 7 feet? I mean, this is the thing we run into all the time with the Home Builders Association, right? They're like, really good policy goal, but you've made it so prescriptive that we can't fit our creative solution into this, unless we're going to be doing some sort of, variance process, but that creates more work for you guys.
Would an alternative equipment compliance apply to this standard? Because if so, that might get to the root. Okay.
I don't think I'll be applied, but.
And I interrupted you before you got to have a chance to talk about the community. And so I think you're bringing up good points, but I did interrupt you before you finished what their feedback on residential homes were.
I don't remember what I was going to say.
While you think about that, I want to respond to the last point for us, which is about the prescriptive nature.
Yeah.
The particular sentence that you keyed in on, the minimum width of 8 feet, actually isn't overly prescriptive. What it does is it helps prevent somebody trying to create a walkway, an elevated walkway, and trying to classify that as a front porch. In other words, it's a 4-foot wide elevated pathway, much like a porch should be, that runs along the side of the house, and then out to the street or the driveway. The intent of the provision, and again, this is one that was developed with the home builders, was to find a way to allow for people that do want to include these front porches to have it be sort of a bonus incentive.
Right. And
even they recognize that things like pathways, et cetera, are really kind of not the intent and shouldn't be qualified. So some of the specifics around the dimensions came from those working groups, or those working sessions with the home builders.
Okay.
Right.
So there's 2 other things. I can get back to the original point I was going to say, but the 8 feet, I can also expand upon that a little bit more. If you look back on housing plans from, a lot of people look back in the Craftsman style era, the 20s, 30s, where people had front porches. They had these big, beautiful front porches. The minimum width dimension on those was typically 8 feet. And we want it to be usable space. So this is maybe 3-4 feet.
Right.
We can't, if we're sitting side by side, we can't really have much interaction from other folks besides us. But if we have 8 feet, which is maybe to the end of the table there, we can sit side by side. We can have kids running around playing. We can have other neighbors. We can have a discussion where we're facing each other. So we want it to be usable space, not just simply a visual enhancement of the building or structure. And then my second point with community building, detached single-family dwellings don't really have any incentives built into their design to get people out to, like, say hi to your neighbors. We have open space requirements in multifamily to improve, health and welfare of residents, but it's also an incentive to get people out to talk to your neighbors. Detached single-family dwellings, we build them, and with the way that it works today is, people leave from work, they come home, they drive their car into their garage, close their garage, do what they need to do, go in their backyard, and never talk to their neighbors. With this, we want people to get outside and sit on the front porch and say hi to their neighbors.
Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make clear that deleting the last sentence obviously wouldn't prevent what you just described. It would just say single family and anyone else, right? Well, you've already sold me, is my point. Like I want to open it up to more potential builders. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say just another challenge that we have with this is thinking of some of our zoning districts like R2 and where you have a small single-family homes and are adjacent to smaller multifamily, and just the footprint and the bulk of that already. Adding 200 square feet to that is pretty impactful to some, depending on where different neighbors are, and that was another reason why we really focused on the single-family detached, because we did want to be respectful that this is adding some bulk in some neighborhoods, and just might have some impact where you have kind of mixed densities from the overall scale. So that was another consideration.
Crystal?
Yeah, a couple. Well, first of all, I want to say that I love front porches and I love the big three-sided wraparound porches. But I will say too that having porches is not necessarily easily or more conducive to inviting your neighbors to come in or getting you out to meet with your neighbors. It's also an extra storage area, so they get to be pretty junky. And some of them, you wish they didn't have them because it becomes quite unsightly. So anyway, so just kind of keep that in mind too. But my question is regarding kind of like wraparound porches, is this actually precluding anybody from making a bigger porch than that? It's got to be the 200 square feet, but can it wrap around the side? It can still, it doesn't have to be one big square.
It could be 1,000 square foot porch. We're only going to exempt 200 feet of that.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, in terms of just trying to convince people to try to do this, I was just wondering if you can actually have, more like an L shape, or if it's going to end up being the square at the very front.
No, when we were looking
So
at
it could,
different
part of it
models.
could wrap around the side, and okay, great, thanks.
Anything else?
Yep.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, what happens if a future owner of one of these houses decides he wants to close that porch completely in?
So, through the chair, that's a great question, and that came up both at FCC and Planning and Zoning Commission. The response to that, it may be sort of the response, but I mean, you could literally build anything anywhere in this town. It's just whether or not you're building it in compliance with building code. So we cannot, you could go and build a high-rise in South Anchorage right now if you wanted to, but you're going to have code enforcement because somebody's going to complain on you and they're going to say, hey, you can't build that there, Pete. But there's nothing that proactively can prevent somebody other than a violation. Somebody would have to lodge a complaint on it.
Jack Frost.
Oh, he's taking notes right now. Pete Peterson's going
It
to
would be a hard time for
Let's go.
George.
I was just looking at his property on Google Earth.
Okay, did you have more?
That's it, thanks.
Meg?
Thanks. So I'm trying to think this through on for folks who want to add a porch, and so not new development, and on the split level in particular. We have a lot of split level homes, and it says on the first level, is there allowance here for it to be slightly multi-level? Because you're going to have, right now we have a lot where you have steps up to the door, so if you want to add a porch, I mean, my house is one of those, it's a raised ranch. So I have 3 or 4 steps up to the front door, small little block porch, which wouldn't qualify under this. But if it would be extended, and I were to rail it all out, like, can that multi-level qualify or not? Because this suggests it has to be on the first floor covered. So I'm just thinking, I want this to be as usable for people to add porches as well.
So the way this is written, you could do that porch, but the only portion that would qualify would be that ground level portion.
That doesn't seem to make sense to me, because then you couldn't get to the front door, so that portion wouldn't be exempted. And it would be probably an integral part of the porch, is that it is a welcoming portion to my home as well. I mean, I know we want to encourage street side activity, but you also want to have a welcoming facade.
Through the chair, actually, I think in your example, because you are an elevated ranch, technically your first floor is that higher level.
So what about split levels, though, then?
That's what I'm
too?
saying.
That all of those types of things, so where you have that kind of partially sunk basement, because we don't have a lot of first floor, second floor stacked housing in Anchorage, because those are easy, and ranches are easy. It's just where you have that kind of partially sunk. So
I think just where it's the first floor. I mean, it would depend in each case, depending on the first floor. And
Just-
specifically because it is trying to encourage the ground level interaction. That's why we emphasize that, because there's also a lot of houses that do kind of have that second, because that's split. We didn't want them just concentrating on that higher, like a balcony versus a porch.
is there a definition of first floor anywhere? Somewhere else in code? Thanks.
That leads to a question, if you have, it's like on the second floor, a little porch thing, that doesn't factor into lot coverage, does it?
It's not covered.
It's not covered. Like you see that, I think it's required in some of the duplexes and so on, where you have to have some space, and they'll just, on the second floor from the master bedroom or something, they'll have a porch sticking out. So you can do that, it's not.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. It's over 30 inches off the ground, so it does count. Because of the height.
The intent of the code section is clear based on those exemptions.
So what is so if it is, say, second floor, you have a little porch off of a bedroom, is that counted into lot coverage?
It does because it's above 30 inches. That's why a lot of people do the back porch, because it's just usually a patio and it's under 30 inches. So you can have as big of a back patio as you want. And so hence why we're trying to incentivize people to do the front patio or the front porch.
So we don't have a definition for first floor. We do have a definition for ground floor, and that's the portion of a building that is the first story above grade plane. So
Maybe that should be consistent.
I would think that tri-level would, the first floor above grade plane would apply.
Do we want to change the verbiage to ground floor? Would that change the intent? Just because we have it defined.
We could make it more consistent with definition.
So we were just having a sidebar that maybe because ground floor is defined and it doesn't change the intent, that we should probably change the language in the ordinance to be consistent with Title 21 and change it to ground floor versus first floor.
Oh, it's the same word.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying anything below 30 inches doesn't count as lot coverage. But wouldn't a lot of these front porches be right at ground level?
They're covered. So once
because
you
it's
add the
covered.
cover, then it becomes part of the cover.
Okay, so that covered's the key thing then.
Yeah.
That's it, okay.
The 30 inches is.
Yeah. You could have, right, so that's a good point. So you could have a 20-foot high patio out your front, out of your front door that wasn't covered, and that would not count. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is little tucks that are just hidden and not really usable for anything other than getting to your front door.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I just had a question about the language. This says a minimum of 4 feet from the street facing side of the house, and then the maximum. Excuse me. And the 8-foot minimum width of. It seems to me, when I think of the width, it's the shorter side, and the longer side is the length. So shouldn't it be 8-foot length minimum? 4 feet is the width from the house. I mean, that's how I kind of. I'm not an expert or anything, but why is it width?
Yeah, but through the chair, we had tossed around a few different, do we call it the length, do we call it the depth, do we call it the width? And, width is pretty consistent throughout code in talking about just overall dimensions, so width seems to be the most consistent.
Okay. It's consistent
But
with the
I
language in
think,
code.
though, you're asking, because you're talking about section F, where we say 4 feet from the
Yeah.
street. So what we're saying is it has to be a minimum width dimension of 8 feet. But from the width standpoint, we just want to make sure that it's, of that, 4 feet is sticking out further than the furthest street-facing facade. Because what we're trying to avoid is if we don't add that language, you could have 8 feet and it could still be behind your garage. So we're saying it has to not only be 8 feet, but it also has to stick out 4 feet from the most street-facing facade.
Those two numbers apply to two different measurement dimensions,
Yes.
though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think you
No, but if it makes sense to the planning department, I think if you have consistent
What does
interpretation,
make sense to
that
everybody?
would be fine.
Okay.
Now that that's been brought up, it's 4 feet from the street-facing facade, but you have the garage, and then you have the further. Well, this is also a street-facing facade, 4 feet. It doesn't really say 4 feet in front of the facade closest to the street. And that's your intent, right?
Yeah.
I don't see that in this section.
That's a good point of clarification.
Furthermost street facing
I think it
facade.
does need to say, that's a good catch, because the intent is that it's the 4 feet from the furthest extent of the street-facing
Or
facade.
street facing facade closest to the street. That's what you mean, which is the
We wanna
garage
make sure it
door.
includes garage.
Well,
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
not house
We
or
covered this in
garage,
another
would that be the
Right
facade?
to
It's not the
forgiveness
garage.
shell in the front yard, there's language in it. You can see it.
Okay.
We'll brainstorm that one.
I think Francis had something.
Okay, Francis?
Did you guys run to ground Ms. Zalatel's question of her home? When Ryan said the definition of ground floor, that portion of the building that is the first story above grade plane. So that's saying the floor of a home that is the first one above grade plane. So a daylight basement is not the first floor in any case, right? So you go to ground level, and then what's the first floor above that? So like in my home, it is the second floor of my home, right? And if that's where my front door is and there's steps up to it, if the language in the ordinance said ground floor, then the porch that went to that first floor above grade plane, that would all be covered by this ordinance. So I think a lot of split levels, if the first floor is a daylight basement, sort of below ground, the first story above, you would be allowed to have this use this tool for that sort of the second floor of your home, which by zoning.
Yeah, so that's what we just said, we were gonna change this to say ground instead of.
Yeah, I think maybe you guys already covered this, but I just had read it for myself and thought about it for a moment, and wanted, I guess, maybe just support what Ryan said earlier.
Okay, Dean?
I had another question on a different angle here. Related to Mr. Dunbar's question about deleting the last sentence. So if this would apply to a triplex or fourplex, and 2 units have 100 square foot porches added on each, does that mean that the third and fourth units, they wouldn't get this exemption for the lot coverage for that whole structure? Is that right? Would you have competing tenants? Or?
I think if we delete that, then we have to, I think we're gonna have to add other language to clarify those exact situations, because otherwise if it's 200 foot, I mean, are we then saying we want 200 square feet exempted for each unit, which then now we're talking, depending on how many units, that unit amount times 200 or all together. So we would have to just figure out if that's what we want to do and apply it to multifamily or anything other than a detached single family. I think we have to then have a discussion about what is the threshold and what are we saying.
Mr. Dunbar wants an amendment like that. Would you work with him on the language?
And then does that open it up? Does that make this, and this seems like that's significantly bigger than what we have been taking to the community councils, so I think it does, I don't know that we would be able to move forward, and the other thing I would say is that we do have some building permits in right now that will benefit from this, and so.
No, then we don't have to go, we can just pass it. You've
Okay.
got it before us, we can just amend it and pass it. I mean,
Okay.
it's fine.
Okay.
You've
We can
convinced
phase
me.
it in later.
Yeah.
More.
I mean,
Okay, I
phase it in more.
I don't want to kill it, but I don't want to kill your guys' thoughts, but I also don't want to not let things.
On that point, though, I mean, if we did something like what Forrest suggested potentially, if we took away the provision shall only apply to detached single-family dwellings, or maybe we just take away the word detached, then, it can start to work itself out. I mean, it's still going to have to meet all the other code requirements and all the building things, because I think with the word detached there, my concern is we're really giving up the opportunity for a lot of zero lot lines. And zero lot lines seem to be the thing, at least in Midtown. And they're very garage forward. And so if they can come up with, and they often are garage forward with the little walkway, and then there's like to the front door. If we can bring those out for, past that garage, that's fantastic. And I guess I don't want to preclude that opportunity at all at any time. But then beyond that, I think it does raise questions, if you have, anything bigger than, you know, a single owner potentially in a structure, so condos versus something, or you have an owner of multiple rentals, I think you've certainly hit the nail on the head that it gets complicated quickly. But I don't think the detached versus attached single family nature necessarily does that.
If I might.
Sure, Chris?
Similarly, I'm in agreement that I think it's not right and fair that it's restricted only to single-family separate units. And what comes to mind are the developments out in Sand Lake that are the duplexes that are essentially single-family duplexes, but they share a wall. And it's not zero lot line, it's somewhat different, but those places should benefit from this too. And so I strongly support the idea of making it more generally applicable.
All right, thanks, Chris. Forrest?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys have convinced me that that porches are a social good. And in East Anchorage, we have a ton of duplexes, just like Chris described, and triplexes that in a lot of ways are single family homes, right? They just happen to share a wall. And I want those families to have access to this as well. Now, I agree with you that our community councils, many of our community councils, are dominated by people who own single family detached homes. And to a certain degree, a lot of the rest of our politics is too. And so you go back and ask for comments, you don't get a lot of the folks that live in the poorer parts of East Anchorage with triplexes. But we have this is before us. You guys have already introduced this, right? This is on this, we can vote on this on Tuesday. Right? And we, as the Assembly, can represent our constituents and amend this and pass it. Now, I don't want to do it in a way that is going to create a bunch of real problems. If you convince me that it will, then I won't run an amendment like that. But again, I don't think, even if we struck out that line, you need to go back and start from the beginning. I don't agree with that at all. And I don't think that these kind of like nightmare scenarios of like all of a sudden there'll be porches everywhere, like so many porches, too many porches. Like I don't think it's going to happen. And two, even if it did, again, you've convinced me that porches are a social good. So I still am in favor of striking that out. Now, again, if there are very specific concerns you have about, large developments, then come back to me. But again, I don't see why a duplex or a triplex or a zero lot line shouldn't benefit potentially from this. And I think actually what's going to happen is relatively few of those places will build new porches because they're expensive, and they're rent and they're mostly renters. And I don't think a lot of the people who actually own all the rental properties in East Anchorage are going to do this. But I want them to have the ability to do it if they can.
So I just want.
Could I ask a point, Chair, a point of clarification? Where are we on the? I heard a discussion about first floor, not first floor grade plane. Where are we on that? Because if we start throwing this from a code enforcement and plan review perspective, if we start referring everything back to grade plane and not specify first floor, now we have to calculate the elevations of the entire lot to get what is the grade plane and building height and everything down. So let's keep it simple for my simple folks and me and the public that have to deal with this and actually know what's going on, because it can get really complicated really fast. And then
so we proposed changing it to the area of a ground floor cover,
yeah,
because we have that defined, and that doesn't seem to change the intent. So that's
I don't see ground floor. I see ground plane.
Okay, right here.
Here we go. Okay, the first story above the ground plane. Okay, but we're pulling in.
Because it's.
But you're pulling in ground plane here. Why not leave it as first floor?
Oh, ground floor.
Ground floor incorporates ground plane here, which refers back to covering doing the lot elevation for the entire lot and building height, and then calculating from there.
So I wonder if we could go back and just evaluate changing the language to this and looking at maybe providing a definition for first floor. And then
let's look at the building code, and building code, and I think we can have a definition from there that we can incorporate.
So can we put a pin in that issue, and then we'll just follow up with you all to make sure we get it right, and then it works for code enforcement. And then, Councilman Dunbar, I just want to just clarify, when you're asking about striking it out, you're still saying the entire sentence, this provision shall only apply to detached single-family dwellings and not just the detached part.
Yeah, the whole thing.
And so I don't think I did a good job of kind of explaining when I was going talking kind of about the different zoning districts and like the R2 and where you have a lot of mix of single family. The reason why we would prefer, the planning department would prefer this to at least just strike the detached and just leave it to single family at this time, is because if you exempting that 200 feet does mean that the 200 feet can go someplace else. So you're increasing the bulk someplace else within the structure, which could allow a significantly, 200 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but it can be when you're in a smaller lot and you're talking about the overall bulk. And so it does have
Yeah, but what you're saying then is it's okay for single-family residents to impose that bulk on their duplex neighbors, not for the duplexes to impose it on the single families. Yeah, I mean, that's what you're saying. I mean, and wealthier people live in single-family homes, and so we're saying that they get this right, and folks that live in rentals won't. And so, I don't know. I'm sorry. That's not a persuasive. Now, if you're saying it's 200 per unit, I get that I understand.
Yeah. Well, I think as we have it written now, I don't know how we would interpret it. I think we would say probably 200 per development, but we need to again clarify that language.
But maybe it should be a little bit larger for a duplex. Maybe it should be 300 for a duplex. I mean, we can figure out those kind of details. But again, I'm not comfortable with single family being able. If we think that there is some cost to imposing bulk, I'm okay with single family imposing it on their neighbors, but their neighbors not imposing it on them. And, but I actually don't agree with the notion that it's a negative. But
and if I might on that, Mr. Chair, I just want to reiterate same that I don't believe we should be crafting benefits for those who have single-family separate homes that we aren't willing to provide for people who are otherwise situated. It just smacks of the history of R1 zoning to me, and I'm curious if the department could come forward with a recommendation before the vote on Tuesday of how they would structure it in such a way that mitigates any threat of potential harm, but at the same time lands a product that is able to be generally applicable across a number of different zones. And in that way, we can resolve this. If it can't be done, then we probably do need to spend some more time with this question, because I am really not interested in polishing our pearls and leaving our other stones to decay.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Meg?
Thanks. So I think if we read the lot coverage section in its entirety, I mean, to me, it's 200. If I read it in its entirety, that the maximum you can get for your lot, for a lot, is 200 feet. Period. Not by unit, not by anything else. This is about an exemption within an entire lot. So that's how I read it. Yeah. So I think that some of those concerns are somewhat mitigated if you read the section in the whole. And that's a start. Whether or not it would later need to be tweaked for equitability concerns as it played out in terms of a lot holding multiple residences and builders saying, look, based on what these other requirements are, I can't build that thing. Yeah. Then that's one thing. But I think in the interim, I don't think we have some of that bulk issue, because you're not going to be able to replace 200 feet throughout the entire development just in one opportunity.
Through the chair real quick, trying to establish a metric for equity when this is related to lot coverage, as you very well pointed out, is tough, because lot coverage doesn't mean the same thing to anybody in similar situations, because it all depends on where they're at, the size of their lot, the size of that structure, et cetera. So the sort of arbitrary number of 100 or 200 is tough, because this is, as Meg described, this is about just sort of a mathematical formula that's applied across the bowl, takes into consideration all the variabilities of the lot size and the building size. So I think that with that change, it seems reasonable.
I agree. I was just thinking that it might be beneficial so that it's very crystal clear, because I do agree with Meg's with that interpretation, but almost having a graphic that shows then multifamily and then clearly, I don't know, if it was going to show it, maybe you don't need to do that. I'm thinking it out loud.
I think it's clear. I decided, well, this is your base assumption when we get into the R2s and some of them. Yeah. So that's
change
another,
it in the graphic.
Well, not just in the graphic, it changes the entire intent.
Yeah.
And so then you're going up to 40% as opposed to your 30.
So to Zimmerman's Constance question, as, in addition to relooking at the first floor, I think we can just make sure that if we need to adjust the graphics to make it more clear that it's only 200 square feet max, whether you have one dwelling or 10 dwellings, I would feel more comfortable. Because I don't know the graphic, we're gonna see it, people are gonna try, so we just need to make sure that we have what we need to say, no, the intent is not that each of your units gets 200 square feet, we just want to be clear we can do that. Or,
You could be repetitive in the language and just add the word per lot after the feet, if you wanted to just add language.
Well, just thinking in terms of if somebody putting a porch on a 0 lot line or a duplex has an impact on the lot next door. I mean, there are still setback requirements, there are still easement requirements, so nobody's gonna build a porch up to the property line. So there's also other restrictions that kind of guide what that looks like anyway. So I don't see that it makes a difference in whether or not it's the 0 lot line or the duplex or the single family. So,
and I tend to agree, because I think in the existing development, we're gonna see the addition of a porch versus the addition of something else. They probably have exceeded their max lot coverage or just at the cusp of it, and they can't add anything else. So they're like, oh, now I can at least add that porch, right? So I think that we'll see the infill for the most part. And then the new development will take advantage of being able to put that 200 square feet someplace else within the development.
and then just in terms of porches, I get the covered part, but what is the requirement or prohibition on screened front porches? Is that still considered enclosed?
Screen is not enclosed.
Right.
Okay.
It would be hardscape if it's like a Florida.
Yeah, good,
art
okay,
country.
good. We do have mosquitoes around here. We want to be out, but we have to deal with the elements.
Screen will stop in the museum though.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, sort of spatially, 200 is a large porch for a single family. If you break it into two, is a 100 square foot porch still a pretty large porch for two? And then if raised to 3 is I guess it would be like a 65 foot porch, square foot porch. Is that a large? Is that enough to satisfy your? This is a real porch.
Probably not, but you also have the 8-foot minimum width you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it would be a design challenge for an architect to figure that out, how they're going to parse out that 200 square feet.
Yeah, well, I guess they could go a little bit over. It just would count towards their.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just the point. Is that we're not saying they can only do 200 square feet. We're only saying only 200 feet will be exempted. So if someone has a maximum lot coverage of 20%, then they can add a porch all day long. I mean, they're going to be able to add a significant porch. And really, what we're talking about is people who have existing developments that we know that a lot of people are kind of at their threshold. Everybody maxes out. A lot of people max out their lot coverage. So this just allows those people. Some people, this might bring them into compliance because it may be that this exemption actually brings them into compliance. So there's a benefit there. There's going to be the infill that can maybe add a porch now because they couldn't before because they were built to the max. And then I think we're really going to start to see the benefit in the new development that comes in. And that was what triggered this, is that we were getting a lot of floor plans that people really just wanted to add a front porch, and they couldn't because it was knocking them out. So we do know that this is a desire, and we're starting to see the tides change to that type of house. And while that tide is changing, we want to encourage it and keep that momentum forward.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you were discussing this change with the home builders, was duplexes, 0 lot lines, did that subject come up? Or were they interested in just doing this for single family houses?
They were fairly quick to dismiss multifamily. So that was
They like only build single family these days.
And so we had discussed 2-family, but I think just our general thought at the time was just be conservative and do single family this time and see if that question comes up.
I'd say this came from.
Can I ask a question there?
Single family.
She was a very big component of this.
Chris? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Ryan, for the purposes of definition, isn't multifamily like 4 to 6 or more as opposed to single, duplex, or triplex? from a lender's perspective in the real estate market, you get into multifamily when you have many, many units, not just a few.
So through the chair, Mr. Costa, that's a good question. So based upon the definitions in code, anything over 3 dwelling units is considered multifamily.
Right, and so that conflict or fear is kind of allayed in the sense if we're just talking about single, duplex, or triplex for the first wave of this implementation before we get to multifamily, which could cause all kinds of concern.
Chris?
Yeah, through the chair. If you think about, Chris Schutte, yes. If you think about the fourplex construction that we've seen predominantly over the past couple of years, porches are not really something that they're designing into these. I think 2 really good case studies, and they happen to be identical products, are the Park Strip fourplexes that Opus built. Again, they have steps up to a stoop, much like you'd see in any other city, but they do not include porches. However, they did design in rooftop patios to satisfy some of that open space. And frankly, that's how they can talk to their neighbors, because they all have the same rooftop patio. So there are design solutions to the overall social question or policy question that we've talked about. But I can't see this being a big deal to anybody who's building above a duplex. And even in the duplex world, I don't know that they're going to use it.
Yeah.
Okay, Forrest.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is, I agree with you. I think they probably won't use it, but we might as well give them the option to. One's like a sort of just a very basic question. The on the second line, the number is 4, and then on the line 12, it's spelled out 8. Do we like have a standard when we use a number versus spell out the number? And then should we increase 200 square feet to 240 square feet to make it a multiple of 8? Because you've set that as sort of the base. Then you could have 3 80 square foot porches, for example.
So that's a great suggestion.
I think 200 is divisible by 8 as well.
Oh yeah, you're right. But I still think 240 is cleaner. 8 by 10.
Through the chair, just in response to that math question, which was expertly answered by Chris. Keep in mind, one of the challenges that we often face or feel when providing Title 21 text amendments that have already gone through the public process and been recommended and approved by planning and zoning is we're a little fearful of deviating too far from any intent, particularly if there's an issue, as Ryan illustrated, where councils and others that are reviewers of these have strong opinions. I still think we're in safe territory with this one, but I raise that as a concern.
Thanks. Anything else? One question is you're thinking 4 feet in front of the facade closest to the street. But I wonder if that's really necessary, because you see those snout houses, and here's your house, but if there's no porch there, it would be a nice thing to put a porch there, and if it's 4 feet out, you get people active in this area.
So what we're seeing, and this is, the reason why we went to that is that a lot of those garages are sticking out enough, and if you actually had it from the elevation in the front door was, it won't get out past that garage. And so you would be essentially blocking it off on 3 corners from your neighbor. You maybe would get the view from your one neighbor to one side, but you would be cutting it off from the view on the other. And depending on how their houses were set up, you could effectively have garages blocking all of them. So it's not really in line with the intent. And honestly, it was really kind of funny when we were meeting with the homeowners. One got up and promptly drew something that said, "Well, aren't you afraid you're going to get this?" And we thought, "Oh," and the other builder was like, "Damn, you just sold my secret." So I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't agree. I think that we will not get what we intend if we don't do that dimensions to further subdivision.
Can you have existing and future houses? So they put a porch on their existing house?
They can still add, I guess I just want to clarify, they can still add a porch. It's just if they want to qualify for the exemption, then this is what they have to follow. We're not precluding anybody from doing anything, and we're not requiring anybody doing anything. We're providing a bonus that clearly states we're trying to achieve something, and if you design to achieve what we're trying to achieve, then you get an exemption. So I just want to be clear of what we're doing, what we're not doing with this.
What, you can't add a porch if you're already at the maximum lot coverage?
Well, you can't, no. Unless you want to add a porch that's under 30 inches and not covered. So you could.
Out from your deck.
Yeah, if you want to add a deck.
A deck.
Okay. Meg, on the way out.
No, I'm on my way up, but I guess the question is, do we need to postpone this for 2 weeks? Or are we ready to go even with the changes?
I think we can get
Okay.
you what you need.
Okay.
Yeah, let's keep moving with this one.
Okay, I just wanted to check if there are amendments coming, then great.
So
we'll
to
just
the
make those
point,
to
through the
say-
chair, if there are additional amendments besides what we've discussed today, it'd be helpful to get them, because I think we have enough changes now that this really will look better in an S version. I don't know, we haven't even touched on it yet, but there was one oversight that we saw in the ordinance that was introduced, and so we have one tiny language tweak of our own that we haven't added yet. So I think where we're landing as an S version might look cleanest.
And you'll bring that forward, we'll have it tomorrow morning.
We'll do the best we
Get through
can.
the whole thing. Okay, so do we want a recommendation on this? Do you want to, are we there?
I recommend approval. I mean, all the amendments we've talked about, the S version, just make it applicable to a broader swath of Anchorage homeowners or renters. But I think it's, again, I've been convinced this is a social good. I think it's a nice little bonus, and I support passage.
So you don't want to, but we haven't seen what we'd be recommending yet. Do you want to just recommend that we
Nope.
send a recommendation that porches are good?
Yeah, notionally. I notionally support this. I mean,
The intent is.
yeah.
I think that it would be a motion to support the ordinance with the recommended amendments.
Yeah.
And so once we see those amendments, we can either say, well, that's not what we talked about, or that's what we talked about, good work. Or the S version, the forthcoming S version, same.
Okay, and the amendments would be strike detached, single family, so it'd just say single family.
And then, so I have it would be the area of, then looking at first floor, clarifying that if we need to, providing a definition for what first floor is. And then spelling out the number 4, to be consistent. Feet from the furthest street facing, I think clarifying that we're talking about the elevation closest to the street. And then adding after a maximum of 200 square feet shall be exempted, add per lot, and then striking the last sentence.
Oh, the whole last sentence, not just the detached.
That's what I heard from this,
You may know it off the top of your heads, but I know when you get into the multifamily, there's already so many incentives. Double check that we're not tripping up somewhere there, because that's somewhat complicated stuff. I mean, how would this impact the porch above the garage and all that business?
Well, it wouldn't impact it shouldn't impact anything, because again, we're not adding a new requirement.
Right.
We're just saying if you meet this, you would be exempted, so it'd be a matter of, but we'll double check. My gut tells me we won't, but I could have been wrong.
Well, we'll find out later if you don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion to support as amended, like Michelle just said, and any opposition to that?
Do we don't want to go 240, make it a little bit bigger? Chris, you're right about the math, but it would allow 3 80-foot square foot porches.
I'm okay with that. I think that porches are actually an asset, other than what Miss Kennedy's concern was, which is definitely viable. And in my neighborhood, you don't need a porch to stack cars on top of each other. So,
Sure. Mine either.
yeah, So I would be supportive of the larger number, but I don't know if that then encroaches on the staff's concerns about their dance that they already did with the Planning and Zoning Commission. I would be supportive.
Is 240 from 200, is that acceptable to you guys? Is that getting too large?
You went to the community councils. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence.
If the concern is, splashback from the public, I think you have a number of us who are willing to take the heat on that. You can direct them to us.
Can we do the S version with all the other amendments that we
Sure.
suggested, and then if you want to add 240?
Sure.
But
that's fine.
I would request that you not go any higher than that, because I think that
Sure.
is getting out of the intent of what we really sold to the public. But I think in the context of proposing 240, because now it's applying to more than just a single family that has a lot of merit.
Okay.
Yeah, and we are talking about an incentive too. So I mean, that 40 square feet, if it's a new building, it's like design around that. You subtract 40 square feet from somewhere else so that you can get larger front porch. But I do see the point that if you did have an existing building that was already built to max lot coverage, you want a little more.
So here's a question then. Would it be fair to say 200 feet for a single family property and then 240 for above, right? So that if it is a more dense units, they could have a little bit more, but we wouldn't then exceed the 240 that was, or the 200 that was already proposed.
So my personal opinion is that's not necessary, because one, I think then you just open a debate, is 240 enough for multifamily?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so we have 4 things on the agenda. If we ignore the tentative one and we've done 2, this has been good discussion.
Yeah, made substantive discussion.
So I guess, are we done with that? So we're gonna have a recommendation to approve it as amended, and we like portion.
Yes.
And there'll be an estimate. Okay, so next up is this landscaping. Who's on for that?
Mr. Chair, that'd be me. So this ordinance, we had worked hand in hand with Watershed Management Services on this. Watershed Management Services had some concerns with the fact we have very strict landscaping requirements, and they were seeing projects where people were having to take large swaths of existing mature trees, clear cut them, and then plant immature trees, and then design bioswales to control drainage that were simply just turf grass, when the existing vegetation that was there prior handled that drainage in a far superior manner. So that there's a whole laundry list of benefits to preserving existing vegetation that I can run through, but many of which are detailed in my memo here. But what this ordinance aims to do is to add landscaping requirements under alternative equivalent compliance to be eligible for that. And what that process looks like is it's an application that's submitted to the planning director, and the applicant has to demonstrate that they may have a design that differs from the subject standard, but it's going to meet the intent of the subject standard in a slightly different way. So, a simple example of that, if you're required to plant 10 trees along your perimeter, but you decide to plant 8, but you're going to incorporate some type of visual break along that perimeter, say a piece of art, like a large sculpture or something like that. That could be something that you could apply to the director to say that we're not going to put in those 10 trees, but we're going to put 8 trees on a sculpture, and it's going to have the same benefit. And then along with that, we are removing the prohibition that cottonwood trees cannot be included in the calculations for existing vegetation to meet your landscaping requirements. I think there was some pushback from the public. There was a very vocal group that did not like cottonwood trees, and they did not want them to be included. But cottonwood trees are a native tree to Alaska. They are our largest deciduous tree. They do have some unique characteristics about them. They're fast growing. They do have shallow roots. I will 100% agree that they're not the best tree for every application, but they are a great tree for a variety of applications.
Don't be woodist.
I do want to add too that when people are forced to remove those or not count them, then they disrupt the root system of all the existing vegetation that they're trying to keep, and they end up losing more of the natural vegetation that they're trying to retain, and they end up planting more. So I know that Assemblyman Dyson has had some concern about revegetation, and this actually kind of gets to helping that, because this is going to eliminate clear cutting sites because they can actually use all the material.
That's correct. And the last part of the AO, so there are, and I'm happy that Jack's here because he can probably speak to this in much more detail than I can, but so there's a period of time in which you can request your inspection to get all of your landscaping looked at to get your certificate of zoning compliance. That's currently limited between May 31st and September 15th. So we are proposing to extend that to September.
August 31st.
Or August 31st, I'm sorry, Jay. It's currently limited to May 31st to August 31st, so we are proposing to extend that to September 15th, and we also have an amendment that we would like to put forward that will give the director additional flexibility to extend that period beyond September 15th. Because we've had quite warm autumns lately. So if we do notice that we have these weather patterns where really you can get those plants in the ground by mid-September and they'll survive and establish roots in October, then the director has that discretion to say, yes, you can go ahead and you can extend that period at which you can request that inspection.
Okay, any questions? Thought we had something where watershed management had a problem.
So we did get a comment from a staff member of Watershed Management Services that was not privy to the conversations that we had had prior in developing this ordinance. Their concerns are valid, they're not incorrect, but they did pertain more to site stabilization than they did to landscaping requirements and beautification and things like that. So their comments were more relevant to, say a road project where they're going in and they have just swaths of bare soil. You have to then plant living ground material on there to stabilize that soil so it doesn't wash away into waterways and drainage ways. That's where that concern really stems from. So they just wanted to double down and make sure that we weren't conflicting at all with site stabilization requirements, which we won't do with this ordinance.
Okay, Jack.
It's Jack Frost, Code Enforcement. I think that that their concerns are valid, but I also believe that this language supports that, and it says the director may extend, etc., if present climatic conditions support the survivability of plant materials. When we do final zoning inspections, we look to see is the plant alive and can it sustain, and based on the weather conditions. We also consult our landscape architects and arborists before we make those calls, as would the director. So I think everyone's concerns is met, and this is really good language. I support it.
Oh, so the amendment.
Correct.
In particular. Okay, so was this designed to?
It allows flexibility to assist the building community and get the final zoning inspections done and not violate code. And it also takes in consideration the weather from year to year, and the director gives consultation with the subject matter experts to make the decision. We could have a cold year where this wouldn't be, or we could have an exceptionally warm year like we've had recently, where it can go well into October. And the SWIP program that Ryan alludes to in watershed management is to restabilize the soils. You want to get hydroseed down. You want to look at state projects on the highways the last few years. They put the hydroseed down in October, and you've got 8-inch grass in 6 days. So I think this is a realistic.
Okay, and this is to address watershed management.
It's to address this is primarily to address building projects and home inspections and commercial inspections, but it also, I'm just extending that into the SWIP. They're trying to get the soil stabilized with vegetation. This allows that.
And the homeowners association, actually, I've looked at both this ordinance and with this amendment, they are, Eric Visser just contacted me yesterday, they're actually writing a letter of support as well.
Okay, it just gives you more flexibility.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it codifies it. I mean, to be honest, the last 2 years have actually extended the period. And so we knew we were making this change, so we thought we should codify that just to make sure that in the future, every director has that and agrees with having that flexibility.
And it's a hard stop when they call for inspection. If it says August 31st, there are no provisions to allow anyone to make exceptions, so this does that.
Okay. Pete?
Wow. So, no, I'm good, thanks.
Anything? Chris, you on the phone? See there.
I am. I don't have any concerns.
Okay. Forrest?
Nope.
I think one thing I think we should allow a 2-for-1 exchange. Cottonwood.
2-for-1.
2 cottonwoods.
Well, this could actually reduce the cost of building, because you would have to cut those cottonwood trees down and then, buy and install the new landscaping. So I can see why the home builders are in favor of this, because anything that reduces the cost of building might actually get more buildings built. So
And it's a benefit to the community because, you know, new vegetation takes a lot longer to fill in. And so if we can encourage people to just have that, retain what is already on site, you already have that mature growth. I mean, it provides a lot better buffer, and it meets the intent faster than it takes the newer landscaping to get there. And I don't know, I mean, just one more thing to add to one of the positives of this change, especially with the alternative equivalent compliance, is in addition to working with watershed services, this is also a benefit for the school district because when they're looking at their site designs, they're having a lot of issues on playgrounds, kids getting on the roof, a lot of interesting things, and this allows them to really incorporate, allows them more flexibility so they can incorporate the set 10. So
crime prevention through environmental design.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So they were very supportive of this change as well.
Anything else, Forrest?
I'll just note that the most aggressive tree for new growth is the cherry tree from the status. Choke cherry. Cut down a cottonwood, get a choke cherry.
No, let's not say we did.
No, that's what I'm saying. We let the cotton trees, let the cottonwoods fight off some of those choke cherries.
Well, you know, just a comment too, just the idea of trying to stabilize soils. I mean, you take out a cottonwood, you do so much more to even a lot next to you that you don't really necessarily know that you've impacted. Yeah, so if we can leaving it natural is better.
Okay, so we have a recommendation. What do you want to do?
I move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes.
Okay.
Any objection? Okay. On a recommendation on this one, landscaping?
Passage.
Sure.
Okay, any objection? Okay. Marijuana modifications and freestanding signs.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Chair. So this AO, so if you can recall, several months ago when we were originally drafting the on-site consumption ordinance, there were several other aspects to the marijuana regulations that we had included in that AO that was then decided to be pulled out and included into a separate AO. And then the concern about removing the prohibition of freestanding signs, getting some more public input on that. So we took that to Planning and Zoning Commission and got their feedback on it. So this is the result of those public meetings that you see in front of you. And what this mainly does is it changes the threshold at what modifications to approve special land use permits have to be approved by the director and what has to be approved by the assembly. And what we've noticed is that there are several things that are going before the full assembly that perhaps aren't appropriate to be decided upon by the assembly because they are rather minor. So the first modification that we are proposing to be approved by the director instead of the assembly would be the addition of a caretaker's unit on the property. I can't recall the exact reason why that was added on as something that the assembly should rule upon, but there are many benefits to having somebody living on site for security and just general maintenance and sharing the facility. If something goes wrong in the middle of the night, somebody's actually there that can respond immediately. Then the increase in retail sales area open to the store more than 20% of the approved area within the approved licensed premises area. That was a common one that came up, and it's more from we're proposing to delete it from more of a theoretical standpoint in the fact that we've already reviewed that business for that amount of licensed premises area and said that that is appropriate in this location. If they are now removing, say, an employee break room to expand sales floor area, they're still operating within that envelope of the licensed premises area. So it just didn't really seem meaningful to require them to go back to the full public hearing process through community meeting when it's something that's that minor of a change, and it's still within their square of operations. And we have a similar provision that we're proposing.
Something at this point. So in the deletion of that, isn't it sort of redundant already on the first page? The increase of 20% in gross square footage of the licensed premises in A little I?
So that
it's different.
That's a great question, Dean, and it is different because the 20% applies to the entire licensed premises area, to whereas what we're proposing here is just 20% of the retail space open to the public within the licensed premises area.
Retail space is a bit smaller than the rest of the retail licensed premises that is open to the public.
Correct.
Okay.
So in one case, the footprint grows 20%, we would see it. But if it's just within that same footprint, we don't see it.
Correct.
Right.
And there's a similar provision below that for the cultivation space. So it'd be 33% of the cultivation area within the licensed premises area. If it's increasing more than 33%, then it would go before you. However, with the marijuana cultivation facilities, we just consider everything within the licensed premises area the cultivation area. So it's kind of an odd. Sorry. From a practical standpoint, it's a bit of an odd code requirement. So again, if we delete this, then anything that was increasing above 20%, you would see. Anything that's below 20% would just go to the director.
Hi, folks. This is Christopher. I have to step out for another committee meeting. Thank you.
Do we have something else coming up?
It's the subcommittee on communications. Tim and Meg.
All right, well, thanks, Chris. Okay,
And then the next modification requirement that we're proposing to delete is an addition of a type of extraction not already approved by the Assembly. And the reason we're getting rid of that is because we've already noted what safe manufacturing processes should be in the B3 district, and then it's basically kind of anything goes in the industrial districts. And we think that that's appropriate. So, and there's other instances where if somebody's operating a manufacturing facility and they are extracting using butane, which is the most hazardous, but now they want to install like a rosin press or just a simple like ice water bath agitator. Those are rather benign. I mean, a rosin press is just a hydraulic press that just presses product and the extraction comes out. And an ice water bath is just a simple agitator washing machine type thing.
Did you learn this in college?
It's scary how much he knows.
Yeah. So, if somebody's extracting product using butane and then they install something that is not nearly as hazardous right next to it, they then have to go through the public process and have a public hearing in order to get that installed. So we feel that it would just be more appropriate to have the director have the discretion to decide on those matters, considering that we've already stated through zoning restrictions. B3 is restricted to CO2 extraction and other non-butane methods, and then I-1 and I-2 can be butane. The next requirement is the annual report. It's currently quarterly, but we just don't see enough of these modifications to really justify having staff time be devoted to generating a quarterly report, which is why the Assembly's been getting annual reports. So from a practical standpoint, nothing would change. It would just codify it to an annual report of all those modifications approved by the director rather than a quarterly report. And then that brings us into removing the prohibition for freestanding signs for marijuana establishments. That was originally put in so that we mirrored the state requirements. The state has now updated their regulations to allow for one freestanding sign. And we feel that it is appropriate and fair to allow a marijuana establishment to freely advertise their business in the same manner that any lawfully operating business in town is able to operate. We did get some public comment at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing in opposition. However, the Planning and Zoning Commission chose to proceed with this as written. I didn't feel that it was any type of nefarious or egregious allotment to allow a lawfully operating business to lawfully advertise.
I will add, Mr. Chairman, the one downside of allowing the single freestanding sign is that the downtown retail establishment on 6th will no longer have the market cornered on clever signs that don't actually advertise marijuana, but somehow let you know that there's marijuana inside. They change their message out weekly, but it's equally funny every week and clever.
Which location is this?
6th Avenue Outfitters one.
Right
I
down
forget
from
the name of it.
City
Really?
Between there.
But
Oh,
their-
the old, yeah.
Yeah,
used to
their
be,
signs were very clever, but actually completely legal. And
Yeah.
so,
We're not allowed to advertise pot here, is that what
Pretty
you're
much.
saying?
Yeah.
Okay, that
Or you know you want to know what's inside.
exactly.
That's right, I
See,
remember
you-
that now.
Oh, I never.
Pictures of my
You're gonna mess up their whole shtick. Okay,
So
so,
the,
and then you have old code just parallels.
Correct, yes, and then it'd be paralleling old code. And then we are proposing one additional amendment here to this AO, and this, quite frankly, was an oversight on my part. It was a modification I had been meaning to put in there, but it just didn't get incorporated into this AO. And what that will do is, currently it says, if you look at page 1, line 33, so that'd be subsection II, any second or subsequent change to the gross square footage of the licensed premises of any amount. So, one example that we've seen is somebody increased their licensed premises area by less than 20%. Then they came back and they had to reduce their licensed premises area, and that had to go before the assembly. So really their impact on the community theoretically, or neighbors theoretically, is going down. So yet they would have to be required by code to go before the assembly. So what this amendment would do is it would change it from any second increase or subsequent increase thereafter. So anytime that they're, and what this would prevent too is somebody from incrementally increasing their licensed premises area every year through director approval, and then go before the assembly the second time they increase and any time they increase thereafter.
Okay. Pete?
Thank you. And how many square feet is going to be allowed for this freestanding sign? I'm looking here, I didn't see that.
So it's required to be in compliance with state code and our code. So I think the state has a limitation of 4,800 square inches. I can't recall what that equates to in square foot, but it's far less than the 200 square foot maximum that we allow in commercial districts. I think it's 60 square feet. 60 square feet. It's 4,800 square inches. So it's far less than, say if you operate a restaurant or any other commercial business, you can get 200 square feet and maybe 40 square feet.
200 square feet's a big sign.
Yeah, it's as big as a
Let's
porch.
get up one on each side. Forrest, anything?
No, I wanted to hear briefly from industry.
I will open it up for general public comments.
Okay, we usually when there's somebody from the home builders, we'd ask them about the porches, like we usually ask
I know I'm
people.
going to change that because I got pointed out that that's not always fair. So that you're showing a preference for the industry. So we'll get the same place, but I think it's a fair comment. So, anything else on this? Any public comments on this?
Oh, okay. I just have questions, I'm sorry. So everything right now.
And that would be done by
Dana
public.
Wilson, I'm sorry. So everything that's being removed out of here would no longer be a change or modification, it would just go through a minor modification process? Okay. That's all I had. Other than that, looks good.
Did you see the amendment?
Check it. Yep, and this looks good. An example would be Raspberry Roots, where we actually had a decrease in square footage for manufacturing. We had a community council meeting and come in front of the board. And so even for adding it, like an additional extraction, we still do the minor process, because we still gotta go through building safety and whatnot, right?
Yes.
Okay, so everything is still the same, just everything we're taking out goes to the minor, everything that's staying in goes to the major. Well, is there a part where you add these things that you're taking out back into the minor process?
No, it would just be lumped into general changes to the processes, operating procedures, license premises area. That all kind of gets lumped into the catch-all of the minor mod.
Okay, so people are just supposed to know, like, if they do these things, they should file a minor mod?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
I'd welcome you to read it really carefully, and if you don't see that clearly, maybe recommend some wording that would make it clear, because it really should be written so that
Yeah.
people going into the business can read it and understand Amanda?
I just think maybe once it gets passed, maybe there should be like a summary from like the clerk's office that gets shot out to all the licensees. I would kind of alert them because I don't think it's going to be clear. I think it looks like to like a licensee, they're like, oh, you took it out. I don't have to file anything, anymore. But I
Well, I mean, in the assembly resolution, we have had issues with people just not reading the assembly resolutions and their conditions of approval. In the assembly resolutions that approves the special land use permit, it clearly states in there that this operation shall be in substantial compliance with the narrative, the plans on hand, everything that's tied to this approval. So if you change anything within those plans or the narrative, technically you have to come back to the planning department and say, okay, I want to do this, where does this fall? We do have a catch-all that says, it states all these different modifications that you can do, and then at the last paragraph it says something along the lines of all other modifications shall be considered by the director. So that's where that catch-all of all other modifications considered by the director.
So we need to change our boilerplate thing. Mandy?
So,
Mandy?
through the chair, on that note, that's a discussion that the clerk's office is currently having with our social medias. How can we use them to be beneficial for licensees? Because I've never kind of put that information out other than email notices or mailers. So that's something that we're discussing reaching into is Facebook, Twitter, and whatever other social medias we've been working with is like licensing blasts, notifications, so any kind of changes to code, any kind of notices of expiration, stuff like that, so we can kind of get that out a little bit more readily too. So that's something that we are discussing.
That'd be helpful.
Dean?
Thank you. I just wanted for my clarification when you were talking about if the licensee changes the operating plans and when they need to come back to the planning department. And would your review then fall under, I guess, the little letter B on page 3, where the director looks and in the director's discretion says if it's major enough to send to the assembly. But if it's just a minor change in the operating plan, then the director can decide. Is that the applicable code provision to looking at changes to operating plans?
Yes.
Page 3?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, we could upgrade the flow chart or create a separate for this.
For monitoring, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would, that's a great idea.
That's a good idea.
Make it visual for everyone.
Okay, anything else? Gene, did you have anything? Okay, so we're trying to get close to the end here.
Yep.
Any recommendation on this?
I recommend passage.
Me too.
Any opposition? Okay, anything else in the minus 3 minutes we have? Eugene, did you have?
Are you on audience? Are you on audience or
Sure.
you want to?
You're on.
You are, okay. I will respect, thank you. My timer. Name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for over 40 years. One of those years approximately Anchorage resident, currently a resident in the Metro Valley. I'll go with the last situation and compliment the chair and how a situation was handled. Assembly member Dunbar was, let's open the particular item in the marijuana thing, open up to the industry. And the chair respectfully says, objected and needed to be more fair and open up to the public. And thank you, Chair. That is the way to do it. It's frequently a situation in direction that I see in the other meetings in the assembly. I see hear the industry and forget the public. And no, in this room, I only recognize 2 members of the public here. I believe everyone here, other than 2 people, myself and the other party, are members of the public. Everyone is related to the community and government. So, with all due respect. Second, notice the meeting. No information except the time, date, and location. Again, the public has no clue what your agenda is, what you're going to talk about. So that's still a problem. Also, it's more frequently where people are engaged in talking without the recognition of the chair, don't even state their name, so whoever listens to the tape will not know who's speaking. And I saw certain instances where union employees were getting up, talking among themselves at the table, and that was what we call disruptive, and it's difficult enough to hear what's being said with respect. And the last thing I'll say is, and just close with this, you know I monitor meetings, okay? There's no doubt of that. Now, I noticed Assembly Member Zalatel had left to go to another meeting. I heard a couple minutes earlier, Constant said, I have to leave the phone, I gotta go to a meeting. Curiously, what meeting? And here's possibly the answer to that. Works at Communications Subcommittee, 10:30, City Hall. Now, why would I be so concerned about that? It's under reference to the Assembly. But if you go into the public notice section, there is no record of that meeting. There's no clue. And how I get it is that sheet that you have outside City Hall that you see posted, okay, that's where this is coming from. It's not on the main notice. And the subcommittee is referenced on the Assembly, but what part of Assembly? And the Assembly has a lot of committees and so forth, rules or whatever. But when you go to the website, which I did and made copies, there's no reference to that subcommittee, who's on it, and so forth. And so the public is working blind. And I'll be curious, I'll probably leave shortly to get to that meeting, but this is not the way to go. And, oh yeah, close with this last thing. You made decisions here on every one that I saw here. Only on one occasion, and close with this, did you bring out and ask the public before you decided on the matter? And that was the marijuana. All the others, which is going to the Assembly for public hearing, there's a failure to ask in the public what you think about it before you made a decision. And thank you very much, and with respect.
All right, thank you. I believe the meeting that's started now in communication will address many of those comments. Better communication of the issues you brought up. Scoot on over there. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.